right. Good morning, everybody. Today we are talking about the mindset behind money and investing. And a lot of the conversation that we're going to have today is based on a book that Randy's going to introduce here in a minute. But we're talking about the psychology of money and why we do what we do with our money and with our wallets, and how important that mindset is as you accumulate wealth. So without further ado, what book are we talking about today?
We're talking about Psychology of the Money. Why don't you hold it up, Jeremiah? You got it right there. Written by Morgan Housel. I've read through this book now twice, and I think it's not groundbreaking, but it talks about some fundamental issues that investors need to embrace in order to have success in their life. And I think it really comes down to understanding what do you do with your wallet? And I think that's really a good it's just a good thing to understand.
Yeah, a book we often give to clients and just make kind of it's just got some good principles to live by. So
yeah. This is probably the book I hand out the most to clients. I usually have a number of them on my bookshelf, and part of it is that it's not so much a how-to in the sense of do this and do that, but rather it's just how to approach money, how to think about it, and it touches on things like slow and steady wins the race, versus trying to time the market, or the idea of a scarcity mindset versus the abundance, to say, hey, there's a lot of opportunity out there. Let's not be so focused on one. So some really good principles that we'll talk through, not all of them today, but just a few of the ones that we see are really useful for clients as how they think about their money.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, I've read other books, and we're talking about behavioral finance. And there's a lot of psychological studies, and I've read some very comprehensive studies on that. For most people that are amateur investors or just starting out, it's too much of a overload. But I like what Morgan has done within his book. He's really broke it down into what I call simplistic and understandable bites. In fact, he wrote the book purposely, and he shortened the chapters so that people could go from chapter to chapter. They could go from one to whatever, but they could also go to number 6, go back to number 2. It's just a very easy read.
So he distills some principles behind investing, and he speaks at a level where everyone can understand. Because I think if you're a novice investor, you're an amateur investor, you're just starting out, or even if you've been investing for some time, you might be listening to some economists, and it can get complicated very fast. But the reality is you don't just have to know all the details. You don't have to just be an expert in finance in order to accumulate wealth. A lot of it has to do with your behavior and your mindset going into investing. Am I just looking for a short-term win, or is this a long-term decision that I'm making for a long-term benefit? And so there's all different ways that we approach investing. So today what we're going to focus on is kind of that behavioral finance sort of aspect. And, let's just kind of dive into some of the topics, some of the key principles. Here, I love this first one that we have listed, which is wealth is what you don't see.
Right.
And oftentimes, we have friends in our circle that, man, they look like they're doing really well. And it might be because of all the toys they have, the properties that they own, right? And there's a difference between looking rich and actually being rich. So let's talk about the balance sheet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's a big deal. I remember sitting down with a prospective client, and I won't get, they were just from a different country, and everything they had was all paid for. Their house was paid for, everything, all their cars were paid for. And then her comment to me was just, how do these people buy all this stuff? And I looked at her and I said, well, they borrow. And to her, it was a foreign concept. You mean they borrow to buy their house? I said, yes. They borrow to buy their cars. In fact, some of the cars are probably leased. So she was doing comparative with what their standard of living was with what their neighbor's standard of living is. And she was having a hard time, culturally, she was having a hard time trying to justify that. And it was an interesting conversation. She went, they use borrowing. Yeah. So.
And from that perspective, if someone, talk about real wealth, I mean, there's so many people in, our country and any country, but so many people who are borrowing or leasing that they have this constant angst. hey, I
Yep.
have to bring up this much this next month. And especially someone who
Yep.
maybe is a real estate agent, someone works on commissions, right? I have to have this much income next month. Otherwise, all this feels like it falls apart versus someone who could, even if they have the exact same things or even less, they could have the wealth of mind, the wealth of freedom to say, hey, I own this, no debt. I own this, no debt. I don't have this pressure on me. And one that sticks out to me, Randy, also you had a different client, potential that came in and sat down with you, and big fancy house, great cars, all sorts of great things. And I remember you talked about, you went through their kind of their balance sheet and their list, and you made the comment that they were one missed paycheck away from bankruptcy.
Right.
Like everything was just leveraged to the hilt, and they had a great job. They're making good income. You made the comment, if they get injured or if they were to somehow lose their job, like everything would fall apart because everything was leased, everything was rented, everything was borrowed against. And it's such a difference in what people are trying to build. So Lord, I think circling back to your comment, like wealth is really it's a personal thing. What are you trying to build? Where are you trying to get? It needs to be separated from what your neighbors see or what you're trying to project to the world. That might be the lifestyle you want to live or the status you want to have. But really that wealth is a quiet wealth. A quiet wealth inside that says, hey, I'm confident in where I am, and I know what I have is meaningful for my future.
Yeah, I mean,
Right. I think as Americans, we can take for granted the access that we have to credit. And even at young ages, as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, I could have gotten a credit card. Right. And my wise financial planner dad, informed me not to, or to wait, or to use cash. Right. And so as Americans, we're so used to, I want that. And so I'm going to figure out a way to get that. And, I'm making a broad stereotype here, but just to encourage people that as you see other people gain items, personal property, boats, planes, cars, the reality is, you have no idea how leveraged they are. And so it may look good, but actually the wealthiest person on paper might be the person that has no debt. And so maybe they don't have as much stuff, right? But they certainly have a freedom from debt. So
it comes down to consumption is visible. And that's something that Morgan talks about within his book. He said, but savings are not. Their most true wealth is hidden from view. And people have under the water, they have a lot of, like I always go back mortgage. Right now, people talk about mortgage rates. Well, 40% of the people that own homes in this country own it free and clear. And you probably would knock on every single door, and the debt to income, the ratio to equity probably is different from household to household to household. And it's not an age factor, it's a mentality factor. It's just kind of interesting how people just kind of grow up, well, I can get that because I can go out and borrow it. Well, what happens if you just take away that borrowing capacity? And what are you going to do then, right?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think our next point that stands out to me as we kind of go through the list of different items is the idea of compounding. And to me, the psychology of this is not comparing your present to someone else's middle or someone else's end. And I think to that comment, that's a huge concern in the sense of saying, if I see someone else's career, I want to have that. I want to, whatever may be in a financial, like you said, the consumption view. And, we make some poor choices to try and get there. I want to have these things. But really the compounding, if you can, and to me, that's the whole reason to build a plan. If this is what you want, if this is the life that you want to get to, let's build a plan of how to get you there in a reasonable way. There's a story about Warren Buffett. He's one of the most wealthy people in the world, but it talks about that 99% of his wealth came after he was 50. And so he spent, the first part of his life learning, education. Benjamin Graham was one of his professors, starting his investing. He had the foundation he was building for years and was very wealthy. Pretty quickly on, he did great investing, was a great manager. But really, that compounding growth, that compounding interest. By the time he was 50, he had a big enough base to start making those massive returns. So 99% of everything he has came after he was 50. We talk about that with clients. Yeah, it's wild, right? We talk about with clients of not feeling behind or not feeling that their journey needs to be compared to someone else's journey, especially when you're mid-career, right? You might be looking to people a decade older than you. Why how do they afford a beach house, or how do they do this? Well, one, that's a poor comparison, right? But two, it's kind of like running your own race, but building your own plan to getting where you want to. So I think compounding is so powerful, and it's easily overlooked.
And a lot of people want, they put a goal and they want the outcome first. They don't want to live through the process. And I've talked to younger people and say, I'd like to have what you have. I said, are you willing to go through the time and the discipline to get it? And I said, it really comes down to it doesn't just appear, right? It is something you build on.
So I love this equation. Time is better than just timing, right? And when you're talking about an investor mindset, and especially the volatility that we've just more recently been experiencing in the market, right? A lot of people are talking about timing the market. When can I get in? When can I get out? When can I get the best benefit, right? And the wise investor that accumulates wealth over time is because they stay invested over the long term.
For sure.
So actually the time spent in the market benefits the investor versus just timing the market. And so I like that kind of equation or turn of phrase.
The question is what's enough? We talk about, he's kind of out of the headlines now, but Bernie Madoff 10 years ago was right in the headlines, and he ended up going to jail for building a Ponzi scheme, which was phenomenal. It was tens of billions of dollars that people thought he had that he didn't have. And then in the book, it compares it to a janitor who nobody knew about, and he died, and he bequeathed his millions to schools and other charities within the area. And yet the janitor had no desire to be known for his wealth. He lived a comfortable life, but he was just very comfortable with the money that he had, and he wasn't trying to impress anybody. It just happened because he just did the right thing all along, right?
Yeah, that's a good soul search, right?
Yeah, it is.
Sit down and say, hey, I want to live this lifestyle. I want to have this wealth, but then to pause and ask yourself why. Is it so that people will see it? Is it so that people will think differently of me? Is it because I want to consume and experience certain things? Or, I mean, we've had a number of clients that just want to have another zero, and they don't know why. They don't know what it's for. They just feel like I need to have this amount of money, and then I'll be happy, or then I'll be secure, or then I'll be able to retire. And, that's a hard question, I think, for Evan to deal with, is the why. Why do you want more than what you have today? And there's a lot of good reasons out there, right? I want a better life for my kids. I want to pass this forward. I've worked so hard. I want to be able to, be different than how my parents retired, right? Lots of good whys out there, but it's a good moment to sit and say, what is my reason for wanting more?
And so what we do for people when we do the planning, we reach a point where everything accumulates, and they say, you've done it. You're successful. You're secure. And so the question of the superpower, what they talk about, is knowing when you have enough. When do you say, okay, I'm done. I don't need to work anymore. Now you continue to work, but you do it for purpose other than gaining money. You do it for other reasons that are satisfying to you or give you that direction in your life, gives you that purpose with what you're doing with other things. But not everything is always based upon money. In fact, I would say once you reach a certain point, money becomes really a secondary issue. It just is not that important once you realize, I got enough. I don't need to worry about this anymore. So anyway.
And what you do at that stage, we have a client I was speaking with actually yesterday that they are doing great financially. They're at a really good spot. And once they passed that enough and realized, hey, we're never going to spend all this, they actually started increasing some portions of their portfolios in risk level, because in their minds, this became money they're giving away. And so it said, hey, this is enough for us, but this portion of the portfolio, let's let it go for 20 years, see how big we can get this, because we want to be able to give this. They talked about universities, they talked about all sorts of things. And there's an element that investing is not just for you, right? Investing can be there's a lot of whys out there, but once you get to that enough, it gives you a lot of freedom.
And contentment doesn't have to be the antidote to ambition, right? We work with entrepreneurs, business owners, people that are highly ambitious, and they're always looking for the next opportunity. They have a strategic mindset. But if they live their life only for the future and only for what they don't have, they're going to miss out on that piece that is so important in the investor's mindset, to be content with what they have currently. And like you were saying, Jeremiah, our investment choices aren't just for ourselves, right? You can only accumulate so much. You can only spend so much. And sure, if you're one of those people that are like, I'm going to do my best to spend as much as I can, then that's a different kind of mindset, right? You're always wanting more. But if we live our lives content with where we are, it doesn't have to be an antidote to ambition. Surely you can grow and try and have strategic business opportunities, but it doesn't have to sacrifice the enjoyment that you have today with exactly what you have today.
So again, I think that as we talk more about this, there's emotions, there's fear, envy, and scarcity. A lot of the news, when we're listening to people talking to us, there's all this conversation about we don't have enough. We're running out of this. We're running out of that. We're running out of, we got to have more of this and more of that. Because now again, I go back to a book that was very popular in college when I was going through college in the early 70s. And that was it's the population bomb. And it was written by a man who said, all of our resources are going to be used up because our population is going to exceed the Earth's ability to produce them. And I think it's really interesting if you go back and look at all the things he predicted, we're not there. We have got abundance. I mean, I look at America right now, what we throw away is just atrocious in my mind. The waste that we have, because we have so much abundance. We are producing more from what we have to feed more, to take care of more. And again, there's the redistribution of wealth. We could talk about the political aspects of it, like countries that, they starve their minorities in their Sudan is just a prime example. They have plenty, but they because of political and religious views, they starve the South. So we hear about all the people that are starving. Well, it's because the North is not distributing the food and the resources to the South. It's just, and it's political action. We have more than enough. It's just, it's the caring of those resources and how we distribute that. So we have a mindset of scarcity. So people have a tendency, we deal with people. It's a little bit, I guess it's more in my generation because my parents, my grandparents, they went through the Depression. And so they see the accumulation of money is really critically important, but then they don't realize when they've crossed over, they're okay. And they don't believe it. I guess it's the emotional aspect of it. They don't believe it. Now, people come out of war-torn countries like South Korea, for example, that they come to the United States. They can't stop accumulating because they grew up or they experienced as a child starvation, and devastation. That imprint on their brain drives them to accumulate, and they never stop. So
yeah, well, that's a good comment that all of us have a background, right? We all have a family background with money, and it's something as an individual or even as a married couple, to deal with, and that's a part of this psychological work as you approach your finances to say, hey, how was this person in the household raised? How was this person? If there are inconsistencies or difficulties, Laura and I have shared this a number of times. We first got married, kind of a personal story. We needed a light switch for our apartment, and so we went down to Home Depot. Like, let's grab a light switch, and we walk over to the light switch or the light. I guess it's a cover plate, just a little plastic cover
like
plate.
a face plate. Yeah.
And we look at the wall. We're like, oh, okay, here's the ones we need it in white. We're both kind of scanning, looking. In the same moment, we both reach out and grab one. We grab very different ones. The one I grabbed was probably 38 cents, and the one you grabbed was probably $4. And we both looked at each other like, well, why that one?
And they look and appear to be exactly the same.
They both look the same. and her response was, well, this one's a little bit more. It must be nicer. We could get this one.
And we can afford it.
And we can afford it, right? It was within our budget, the $3 to get a light switch plate cover. And the one that was 38 cents, well, I said, well, this one looks just like that one, and it does everything we need. So why would we spend more than 38 cents? Like, this does what we need. And we had a moment, in that we just realized how we were approaching money and how we were approaching spending was very different. And of course, it led to healthy dialogue. But I think for any couple, even roommates, or even just yourself, of having some moment to think about, how do you approach money, and is that the best way? Today, if we went to Home Depot and had to do the same thing, I bet we would both grab something slightly different. We might grab I don't know if we'd grab the same one. That'd be great, right?
In the same vein, we talk about, like, if he were to buy me a car and surprise me, I would probably be elated. I'd be excited. I would know that he thought of all the things that I would have wanted and bought me a car. If I went out and bought him a car and surprised him with it, he would not appreciate that, right? And so a lot of that has to do with wanting to pick out your own preferences. But money can be used for enjoyment. There is a place to have, we talk in economic terms about utils, right? Like utils of joy, utils of enjoyment, right? There is purpose to enjoying the money that you have spent time earning, right? We're not saying you have to live like a pauper, but it's interesting to think about how much you will leverage, what sacrifice you will make because of what's the mindset? I deserve it. and this is the opposite of the scarcity mindset, is maybe it is derived from envy, which is one of the points that you made. Well, everybody else in my life has X, Y, and Z. Why can't I?
Right.
Right. So like taking a moment as you go to consider whether it's a faceplate or a new car or that new home or whatever the large purchase is, what's the why? Why are we going to go purchase this, and how much are we willing to sacrifice or surrender? And to view debt not as just a quick means to a quick end, right? It's going to tie you up over the long term. Are you willing to make that commitment? There's a cost to that. So,
and that process of when you say that, what's your why, right? When we sit down, we call that a vision, right? We sit down with our clients and say, what's your vision for your future? And that's taking all those little whys. Well, I want to provide for my kids. That's why. I want to live this life. That's why. We take all those little whys and put them together, and that creates a vision. And once, on our side as planners, once we have a vision of like, hey, this is what I want to do, then it becomes a math problem. Like, how do we get these resources to accomplish this end? What other things are you willing to do to get this vision to live out? And to me, that's a lot of the planning. And like when we build portfolios, even, it's after we've done planning, after we got a vision, after we've done the planning, after we know where we're headed, then we say, hey, these resources that are investable, they need to start doing this job for you. They need to invest at a high return or a very secure, stable account. And that's going to fill into your vision, answer a lot of these whys, and get you where you want to go. And to me, that becomes the fun. That's where I feel like we light up to say, hey, if you got a vision of where you want to go, we're going to help you get there.
Yeah, it reminds me of Charlie Munger, who was the partner with Warren Buffett. And somebody asked him what his goals were when he first started out. He says, I had one goal. And he said, that's just to be financially independent. He wanted to be able to wake up in the morning, not have to depend upon any other resource except for himself for his standard of living. And then he put a little caveat at the end of it. He said, I just overshot. And
slightly.
Well, he and himself, like Warren Buffett, an extremely wealthy individual, right? Unable to use, huge amounts of his wealth that he passed on. But yeah, that's interesting to say. I've just wanted to be stable. I guess I overshot. And we have a number of folks who we get to a point where they're financially independent. They don't have to work anymore. And then we ask them, what do you want to do? And a lot of them will say, I want to keep working. I'm enjoying it. Even some that have like these mentor type roles at work where they're mentoring the next generation, they feel needed, they feel valued. And the fact that they still get a paycheck kind of becomes secondary, right? It says, yeah, I get a paycheck. That's fine, but I don't need it. I still have more to give. I still have more to work. So we have a lot of clients that are still working, but they've already passed that financial independence moment. They're overshooting, if you will. They're overshooting by a bit.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent. I'm a big cheerleader. Don't stop working. If your job is a job that you like, continue in it in some way. But if you're looking for other resources or other things to do, there's a lot of opportunities out there for you to contribute to society. But also, it's a thing to get you up in the morning and keep your brain activated, keep you involved with what's going on. Retirement to me just isn't. It's just not an option in my brain. It just doesn't work well for me anyway. So,
yeah.
Well, all different mindsets, going into retirement. We'll have to save that one for our next episode. But just to round out our time today, we recommend this book, The Psychology of Money, but mostly what we're talking about today is just the mindset and to be aware of your why and your vision behind how you use your money. I'm just going to end on this quote and then we'll wrap up our time today. To save like a pessimist and invest like an optimist.
Outstanding advice. Until next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.